Hiya, I wanted to talk to you about the value of play. Before I start, I want to say how very hard I think parenting is in our society, and I think the reason it's hard is because our children and our families are out of their natural habitat. Our natural habitat would be to live in tribes and communities where the fathers were almost usually present and there was lots of children of various ages. And I think in a situation like that, with the small children being looked after by the slightly bigger children and on through the process, I think child rearing would be a completely different experience, because children, I mean, even in our society, you'll notice how fascinated babies are by slightly older children, and the joy that slightly older children get out of nurturing and playing with babies. So I think that we're on the back foot because we're not in our natural habitat. But in order to make our lives happier and our children's lives happier, I think one of the most important things we can do as parents is facilitate the opportunities to play as much as possible. And it's, to me, the most important thing about facilitating play is to enhance the joy in our children's lives, because when we enhance the joy in our children's lives, we enhance the joy within our family, and it's an ever increasing circle of happiness and contentment. But it's not just about increasing the joy in our children's lives, it's also actually been proved to be a fundamental necessity for the development of our children's cognitive abilities as well. Sergio Pellis he's a Canadian researcher, and he's done a load of experiments on the neuroscience development of rats. And in a number of experiments, they have identified that rats who are deprived of the opportunities to play actually have brain damage, or have behaviour that's very similar to rats that have been brain damaged. And in post-mortem examinations, they can see definite neurological differences between rats who are deprived of play and rats who are given the opportunity to play. And actually, their prefrontal cortex does not develop in the same way when they're not able to play. Stuart Brown is a man who actually he's a psychologist who set up the National Institute for Play in America. And the reason that he first became interested in play as a an area for study was that he was asked to investigate to see if there was any similarities between the mass murderers in America, and without exception, all the mass murderers that he studied had been subjected to a childhood in which they were unable to play, generally because of very over domineering parents who disapproved of that kind of activity. And it was from this realization of this was the only link between these mass murderers, that he started to investigate just how important play is for children. And he's come to the conclusion that it is absolutely fundamental, that your ability to survive is dependent on how much you play, and that in studies in animals, it's been proved that the animals who play the most when there is no danger are the animals who are most likely to survive when danger is present. And I think that one of the ways in which play helps to create a more rounded intelligence and a more rounded survival mechanism is that when you play, you are creating an imaginary world. And that takes an enormous amount of brain energy. Again, science has demonstrated that nothing, absolutely nothing, lights up the neurons in the brain like play. It's like the whole brain is on fire when people are playing. And obviously that's enormously exercising for your brain matter. You also, obviously, you develop the ability to empathize very powerfully when you play, because you're putting yourself into imaginary situations. You're cooperating with the other people that you're playing with, so it leads to the ability to cooperate and team spirit. And you're creating, you're putting an enormous amount of energy into creation. And I've long argued that when children are reading a book, or when adults are reading a book, they are it may help the imagination, but in the process of reading, what they are doing is they are, absorbing somebody else's imaginary creation. But when they play, they are creating their own imaginary situation, and that's got to be more powerfully stimulating for the mind. In NASA now, they've actually got a new function or a new ruling, a new decision in NASA that they will not employ people unless they've got a good history of playing with manipulating things with their hands, Lego and building blocks and stuff, because they've actually been proved, again by a study in America, that people who haven't played with building blocks and those sorts of I can't think of the name of it, but those sorts of building tools as children will have less problem solving ability as adults, which again makes a lot of sense, because the point is that when you're playing, you are learning without it feeling like you're learning. And it's an incredibly powerful learning experience. A lot of people worry that if we just allow our children to just play, they're going to be educationally retarded and left behind by their peers. And certainly in the early stages, it would certainly appear like that. But I think that the learning experience of play is so powerful, that the brains are so well exercised by it, that the children's ability to catch up and even overtake is powerfully in there. And this is proved by the experiences in Finland. For the last 10 years now, they have absolutely topped the educational achievements of all the countries in the world for numeracy and literacy. And their children do not start school until they're 7. And when they do start school, they only have 3 hours of education a day. And this is what happened in Finland, is they actually looked at their education system. Their education system was very similar to the British and American education system, and they looked at it and they decided it wasn't working, and they got psychologists in and they completely reinvented it. And since they reinvented it, they've had amazing results in terms of literacy, numeracy, and not just that, but the actual difference between the highest achieving students in Finland and the lowest achieving students is much, much smaller than it is in other countries. And it's clearly to do with their educational system, because the country right next door, Norway, still uses the sort of American and British style system of cramming everything in as soon as possible, and has similar literacy and numeracy rates to America and Britain. So it's clearly to do with the education system and the more relaxed approach. And for me, that's as far as it's been taken. So children starting school at 7 is the furthest it's been taken by a country's educational system. But there's no reason for it to have been started at 7. Maybe they could have started it at 8 or 9, but nobody's yet had the courage to implement that sort of education system. But it could happen, and it could be a success. And certainly my own experiences of homeschooling, where I didn't enforce academic education on my children until they were willing to accept it, not until their teens really, all my children have, been assessed as having exceptional intelligence. Okay, they've also been assessed as being dyslexic or dyscalculic, and that could be a byproduct of their feral upbringing. But I would rather that they had exceptional intelligence and that adaptability and that creativity, because I think that that's what our children are going to need in the future. I think that those are the people who are going to succeed against the odds. Charles Darwin says that it's not the strong who survive or the intelligent, it's the most adaptable, and that makes an enormous amount of sense to me. Albert Einstein said that imagination is more powerful than knowledge, because imagination circles the world, but knowledge is limited. And Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb, said that all you need to invent is a pile of junk and a good imagination. And these are powerful statements from some of the most outstanding thinkers of our age or previous ages. And there's recently been a television series on the BBC by a man called David Eagleman, a professor that studies the brain. And you know, I've talked about sort of like the results of play on our intelligence and our cognition and stuff, and our happiness. And what David Eagleman is saying is that when children are 18 months old, they're the most extraordinary amount of neuron activity in a child's brain. It's something like 50,000 new neural connections per second. It's absolutely mind-boggling. He's saying that the brain is the most complex thing in the world that's ever been studied. And the way that a child develops is not through creating more neuron connections as they grow older. What actually happens is that they create less, that the brain becomes specializes. It specializes, and so it explains a lot of child development issues. I mean, for instance, we foster a son called Connor, and he's non-verbal. He's got autism and he's non-verbal. He comes from a terribly neglected background. And what all the experts are telling us is that he's unlikely ever to be able to learn to talk, even though he's clearly intelligent enough, because when he should have been developing language as a sort of 2-3-year-old child, he was in such a stressful situation and any attempts at language were not rewarded. So his brain specialized in other areas. And once your brain has started to veer off in a certain direction, it's incredibly difficult to go back and start trying to make a different route. Not absolutely impossible, but incredibly difficult. So I think for me, one of the things that's absolutely fundamental to play and childhood's children being allowed that freedom to play is that it makes them happy. It makes them happy, and what I want for children more than anything is for them to be happy. So you've got this, and also, like I say, once they get in the habit of being happy, once their brains are flowing in this direction, that this is good and this makes me happy, then that will be a habit that stays with them throughout life. Another final asset as far as playing is concerned is that once children get to the age of playing, which I know that you've all got quite young children and toddlers, and I don't really think the play system with other children really sort of gets going hugely until they're sort of 3-4. But once they have sort of got into that play arena, exercise is just not something you have to worry about, because children that are playing are running around and throwing each other back and forth, and it's absolutely wonderful to see that energy. That I feel so envious of a child's desire to just jump up and run somewhere out of excitement. How many of us adults jump up and they can't wait to get somewhere, so they run as fast as their little legs will carry them, and that sort of burning excitement and enthusiasm is a huge benefit of play in my mind. And so I think that, when you put it all together, it really seems to me that, play is far more fundamental to a child's development than anything else it can be doing, obviously apart from eating, sleeping and breathing, but pretty important and well up there as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.